What if I told you that The Omen wasn't just a horror film? That the character of Damien Thorn, the child of Satan, born to bring about the apocalypse, wasn't simply the creation of screenwriter David Seltzer's imagination, but a carefully constructed fiction designed to hide a much darker truth. A truth that powerful forces have worked tirelessly to suppress for decades. Tonight I'm going to share with you the story they don't want told. It begins in Rome, June 6, 1946. A date that would later become synonymous with horror fiction, but which first marked the birth of a child whose existence would spark a chain of inexplicable events spanning continents and generations. His name wasn't Damien, not originally. According to documents allegedly sealed by the Vatican until 2067, he was born Robert Thorn, no relation to the fictional ambassador from the film. The timing wasn't coincidental. The post-war chaos provided the perfect cover. The birth itself was recorded at a small private hospital on the outskirts of Rome, a facility that mysteriously burned to the ground 3 weeks later, destroying all records within. All 7 staff members present during the delivery died within 18 months. Accidents mostly. A hit and run, a fall, a drowning, a gas leak. The official investigations found nothing suspicious, nothing connecting them. Coincidences, they said. The child was adopted by an American diplomat stationed in Italy. This much mirrors the film. What the film changed was the diplomat's identity and the circumstances. According to files allegedly declassified in 1998 and quickly resealed, the adoption was facilitated by Cardinal Stephen Valente, who would later be found dead in his chambers, throat slit by what forensic experts described as an unusually precise cut with an unidentifiable implement. The case remains unsolved. The Thorn family returned to Washington, D.C. in 1947. For 5 years, nothing unusual was documented, nothing public at least. But recently, digitized journal entries from the family's housekeeper, Maria Cletti, tell a different story. Animals found mutilated on the property, the child speaking in his sleep in languages he had never been taught. Temperatures dropping dramatically whenever he entered a room. Maria disappeared in 1952. Her journal was found in 2007, hidden in the wall of her sister's home during renovations. Her sister had claimed for decades that Maria had simply returned to Italy. No immigration records exist to confirm this. She never contacted her family again. The first death directly connected to Robert occurred on his 5th birthday. By age 7, Robert was attending St. Matthew's Academy, an exclusive private school in Virginia. 3 teachers requested transfers within his first semester. One, Dr. James Leland, left education entirely and checked himself into a psychiatric facility in Maryland. His admission papers, allegedly obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2012, contain repeated references to the boy's eyes and something he called the darkness behind them. Leland died in the facility 3 months later. Self-inflicted wounds, 37 of them. A pattern was emerging, but no connections were being made. Not officially. The family's wealth and diplomatic status ensured investigations remained superficial. Problems disappeared. People disappeared. In 1955, a fire broke out in the chapel at St. Matthew's during a Christmas service. Robert, 9 years old at the time, was notably absent despite being listed on the attendance sheet. 5 children died. The cause was determined to be faulty wiring. The school's maintenance records for the 3 years prior to the incident were never found. The Thorn family relocated to London in 1956, ostensibly for diplomatic reasons. Internal State Department memos, heavily redacted but partially visible through FOIA requests, suggests the move was recommended after concerning incidents that required distance from previous environments. No further details were provided. In London, Robert attended Harrow School. His academic records show exceptional intelligence coupled with what one teacher described as an unsettling detachment from normal emotional responses. 3 students who shared his dormitory were treated for night terrors. One never recovered, remaining institutionalized until his suicide in 1972. A groundskeeper at Harrow, William Jennings, kept a personal log of strange occurrences around the school. His entries from 1957 to 1959 document animals found ritualistically arranged on the grounds, always in locations Robert had been seen the previous day. Jennings was dismissed for alcoholism in 1959. His body was discovered in the Thames 3 weeks later, drowning, alcohol in his system. Case closed. The Thorns returned to Washington in 1960. Robert, now 14, had grown to a charismatic young man. School records describe him as exceptionally persuasive and naturally commanding. His circle of friends consisted exclusively of children from powerful families, senators' sons, industrial heirs, the children of media moguls. They called themselves the Assembly, a detail discovered decades later in the private correspondence of Senator William Harrington's son, Michael. Michael Harrington died in a boating accident in 1962. His personal effects, including letters describing the Assembly's activities, were scheduled for return to his family. They never arrived. When questioned in 1997, the officer responsible for processing them had no recollection of their existence, despite his signature on the chain of custody documents. The Assembly's activities remained hidden, but their influence grew. By 1965, its members had positioned themselves in prestigious universities: Harvard, Yale, Oxford. Their communications, later discovered in a storage unit rented under a false name, reveal a coordinated effort to infiltrate specific departments: political science, religious studies, archaeology, media, and communications. Robert himself attended Harvard, studying ancient civilizations and religious mythology. His thesis advisor, Dr. Eleanor Chambers, became increasingly concerned about his obsession with apocalyptic prophecies and ancient fertility cults. She began documenting her concerns privately, sending copies to a colleague at Princeton. Both died within a month of each other in 1968. Different states, different causes, same result. The thesis itself was never filed in Harvard's archives. A comprehensive search in 2001 found no record of its submission, despite Chambers' notes referencing its completion. What happened to it remains unknown. What it contained can only be inferred from fragments of Chambers' notes, disturbing parallels between Sumerian fertility rites and modern power structures, concerning interpretation of Revelation 13, troubling personal theory about blood lineage. After Harvard, Robert seemingly disappeared from public records for 3 years. No employment history, no travel documents, no financial transactions, a ghost. But he wasn't inactive. Witnesses would later place him in Rome, Jerusalem, Baghdad, cities with significant archaeological and religious importance, always accompanied by members of the Assembly, always gaining access to locations normally restricted to the public. He resurfaced in 1974, taking a position at a prestigious think tank with close ties to the State Department. His specialty: religious conflict and power dynamics in developing nations. Within 2 years, he had contributed to policy recommendations for 6 countries. Each experienced unprecedented civil unrest within months of implementing those recommendations. Thousands died. Power structures shifted. Ancient relics disappeared from museums and private collections. The pattern continued. Robert Thorn moved between advisory positions, think tanks, and private consultation. Never in the spotlight, always in proximity to power, Governments changed. Conflicts erupted. Religious tensions escalated in precisely the regions where he focused his attention. Coincidence, officials claimed. Statistical anomalies. Meanwhile, members of the Assembly positioned themselves throughout industries and institutions, media, finance, education, government. A network forming like a web, invisible, until you knew to look for it. Their communications, now conducted through coded references in scholarly publications and seemingly innocuous business transactions, revealed a coordinated agenda focused on specific dates and locations of religious significance. In 1975, something unexpected happened. A screenwriter named David Seltzer wrote a horror film about a demonic child named Damien Thorn. The parallels to Robert's early life were striking, too striking. The adoption in Rome, the mysterious deaths, the influential father, details that weren't public knowledge appearing as fiction on the screen. The film's production was plagued by accidents, lightning strikes, equipment failures, an animal handler found dead under circumstances reminiscent of the fictional characters' demises. The mainstream press reported these as publicity stunts. Industry insiders knew better. After the film's release, Robert Thorn legally changed his name. Records of this change were sealed by court order. His new identity remains unknown to this day, though forensic analysis of signature patterns and writing style suggests he may have assumed no fewer than 3 distinct personas between 1976 and 1990. Seltzer himself became increasingly reclusive after the film's success. In rare interviews, he deflected questions about the story's inspiration, attributing it to research into religious prophecy and creative imagination. In 1981, he told a reporter from the Los Angeles Times that he sometimes felt the story had found him rather than the other way around. The reporter's notes, obtained after her death in 1999, contain an unprinted addendum. Seltzer seemed genuinely frightened when discussing the film's origins, asked if he'd ever met anyone who inspired the character, wouldn't answer directly, kept looking over my shoulder during the interview. The Assembly continued its work throughout the 1980s. Their members now held positions of influence across continents. Archaeological expeditions funded through their affiliated foundations focused increasingly on specific sites mentioned in ancient apocalyptic texts. Items recovered during these expeditions rarely appeared in museum catalogs. Documentation of their discoveries often disappeared from university archives. In 1989, a researcher at Columbia University, Dr. Sarah Keller, began connecting these disappearances. Her work, originally focused on cataloging missing artifacts of religious significance, uncovered patterns that pointed to deliberate suppression and collection. Her research notes detail growing concern about organized removal of specific classes of artifacts, sharing symbolic connections to end times prophecies across multiple faith traditions. Keller died in a house fire in 1990. The official investigation cited faulty wiring. Her research was destroyed. Backups she had stored with colleagues were reported stolen or lost within weeks of her death. Obscure religious discussions that often centered around specific prophecies and bloodlines. Information shared on these forums would disappear without explanation. Users who asked too many questions found their accounts compromised or their personal information leaked. In 1996, an anonymous package arrived at the office of investigative journalist Peter Kaufman. It contained photocopies of partial documents connecting Robert Thorn to multiple unexplained deaths, along with evidence suggesting his ongoing activities under a new identity. Kaufman began investigating, documenting his findings in an encrypted file he updated daily. 3 months into his investigation, Kaufman's apartment was broken into. Nothing of value was taken except his computer and research notes. The break-in was never solved. Kaufman himself disappeared 2 weeks later while following a lead in Chicago. His encrypted backup, delivered automatically to a colleague after a predetermined period of inactivity, was corrupted beyond recovery. Only fragments remained, including repeated references to the child grown to man and preparation for the appointed time. The story might have ended there, another disappeared investigator, another dead end. But in 2001, a server backup from one of the early internet forums, moderated by assembly members, was discovered by a graduate student researching the evolution of online religious communities. The backup contained private messages between moderators discussing RT and his current activities, confirming he remained active under a new identity. The messages referenced the approaching convergence and necessary preparations for 2026. The student, Miguel Santana, published his findings in an obscure academic journal. The article was retracted within days due to methodological concerns. Santana's academic advisors suddenly withdrew support for his research. His funding was canceled, his university access revoked. He returned to his family in Mexico, abandoning his studies entirely. In 2005, a series of private emails leaked from a prominent think tank revealed discussions about historical sites that needed special attention before the anniversary. The exact anniversary remained unspecified, but archaeologists noted that the locations mentioned corresponded to sites associated with ancient fertility cults and apocalyptic prophecies, the very focus of Robert Thorn's missing Harvard thesis. The individuals involved in these email exchanges held positions in government cultural agencies, private security firms, and religious organizations. When journalists attempted to investigate further, they encountered classified information barriers, closed archaeological sites, and sources who suddenly refused to speak. One journalist, Elena Morales, persisted despite warnings. Her investigative notes were found in her apartment in 2007. She wasn't. The case remains open. Between 2010 and 2015, a pattern emerged across social media platforms. Accounts discussing specific historical connections between ancient cults and modern power structures would experience systematic harassment, followed by account compromises and personal doxing. Platform security experts identified the attacks as coming from sophisticated networks, using advanced methods to conceal their origins. No group claimed responsibility. In 2017, retired Vatican archivist Father Paolo Rinaldi gave an interview to an Italian documentary filmmaker discussing restricted documents he had handled during his service. He mentioned files related to a birth in Rome in 1,946 inches that had been sealed by direct papal order. The interview was never broadcast. The filmmaker's equipment was stolen the following day. Father Rinaldi suffered a stroke 1 week later and never regained the ability to communicate. The documentary project was abandoned. What happened to Robert Thorn? Where is he now? The evidence suggests he remains active, his identity concealed behind layers of legal protections and falsified records. Members of the Assembly continue to hold positions of influence across institutions worldwide. Their agenda, pieced together from fragments of leaked communications and recovered documents, appears focused on a specific event anticipated in December 2026, the 80th anniversary of that birth in Rome. References to the convergence and the appointed time appear consistently in what little of their private correspondence has been recovered. Astronomical calculations indicate a rare planetary alignment will occur on December 21st, 2026, the winter solstice. The same date appears in multiple ancient texts, describing apocalyptic scenarios and the rise of a powerful figure with supernatural lineage. Is it coincidence that Hollywood announced a new reboot of the Omen franchise scheduled for release in June 2026? Is it coincidence that archaeological expeditions funded by foundations connected to assembly members have recently focused on 7 specific sites mentioned in Sumerian end times prophecies? Is it coincidence that private security firms associated with the assembly have acquired properties surrounding these sites? There are no coincidences in the story, only patterns waiting to be recognized. In 2020, a data analyst named Christopher Way began compiling these patterns, creating an algorithm to identify connections between seemingly unrelated events and individuals. His work revealed networks of influence corresponding exactly to what we now know as the assembly. It showed communication patterns, resource allocations, and coordinated activities, all pointing toward preparations for December 2026. Way published his preliminary findings on an academic server in February 2021. The paper was downloaded 347 times before the server experienced a catastrophic failure, losing all data. Backup systems failed simultaneously. Way's personal devices were compromised the same night. His research vanished. Way himself requested a leave of absence from his university position the following week. His colleagues reported he seemed uncharacteristically anxious and withdrawn. In his final email before disappearing entirely, Way wrote to his sister, "If anything happens to me, remember that patterns don't lie. They're preparing for something. December 21st, 2026. I've seen too much. Don't look for me." His sister reported him missing 3 days later. The investigation remains open. Way has not been found. What exactly is being prepared for 2026? The fragments of information point to a ritual of some kind, a convergence requiring specific artifacts, locations, and bloodlines. The same elements that appeared in Robert Thorn's missing Harvard thesis over 50 years ago. The same elements that have driven the Assembly's activities across decades. In 2023, a former security contractor who had worked for a foundation connected to the Assembly came forward anonymously, claiming he had provided protection for excavations at sites in Iraq, Turkey, and Egypt. He described artifacts recovered but never documented, sealed containers transported under diplomatic protection, and facilities being prepared at each location. "They're building something," he stated in his anonymous testimony. "Something that connects these sites. Something that requires specific astronomical conditions." The contractor disappeared shortly after his testimony was recorded. His identity remains protected by journalists who fear for his safety. The most disturbing aspect of this unfolding story is how successfully it has been kept from public attention. Incidents reported locally never connect nationally. Investigations stall, evidence disappears, witnesses recant or vanish. Journalists abandon stories, researchers change focus. The pattern itself becomes the most compelling evidence, a systematic suppression of information spanning generations. And now, as we approach the 80th anniversary of that birth in Rome, activity is accelerating. More archaeological sites closed for restoration. More artifacts disappearing from public collections. More researchers reporting harassment and threats. More media attention directed toward manufactured controversies and away from these patterns. The fictional Damien Thorn was created to hide the real Robert Thorn, to transform truth into entertainment, to make you dismiss the pattern as familiar fiction. It works. For decades it worked. But fiction cannot contain the truth forever. Reality bleeds through the edges. The true story behind Damien Thorn isn't just historical. It's ongoing, evolving, approaching its culmination. December 21st, 2026 is not just another winter solstice, not just another planetary alignment. It's the moment the Assembly has been preparing for across generations. The moment Robert Thorn, whatever he calls himself now, has dedicated his life to reaching. What happens then? The fragments of evidence suggest a ritual designed to fulfill prophecies spanning multiple ancient traditions. Prophecies about a child born of both human and inhuman bloodlines, destined to bring about a fundamental transformation of reality itself. Not the end of the world, but its rebirth under new authority, under his authority. Do I believe this? After tracking these patterns, after seeing what happens to those who probe too deeply, after witnessing the systematic elimination of evidence and witnesses, yes, I believe something is coming. Something that powerful people have worked for generations to prepare. Something centered on a person whose life has been carefully concealed behind layers of fiction and misdirection. You don't have to believe. Not yet. Just watch. Pay attention to the patterns as they continue to emerge. Notice the archaeological announcements in the coming months. The unexpected deaths or disappearances of researchers in specific fields. The subtle shifts in how apocalyptic prophecies are discussed in mainstream media. The growing number of closed sites around the world. The convergence of seemingly unrelated threads, all pointing toward December 2026. Remember December 21st, 2026. The convergence. The fulfillment of what began in Rome 80 years earlier. The culmination of the Assembly's work across generations. The moment Robert Thorn, the real Damien, has been moving toward his entire life. Watch carefully. Trust the patterns, not the explanations offered for them. Question the coincidences. The true story behind Damien Thorn isn't finished. It's still being written. And now, whether you wanted it or not, you're part of it. We all are. Watching, waiting, witnessing as the pattern completes itself. December 21st, 2026. Mark the date. And remember, they're watching too.